So Shopee's GMV is probably about 100 billion across all the markets. So when you have $6.9 billion of loan outstanding, times that by 3 or 4, so you have like $25 billion.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Impulso podcast by Momentum Works. So Shopee's parent company C Group recently released their Q2 results, right? So that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed today's episode. So as I was saying, C Group recently announced their Q2 results, and it was a pretty good set of results, right? So I think their quarterly net income grew about 5 times year on year.
So in plain language, 5 times more profit.
Yeah, and of course, I think the stock market reacted well to it. Their share price grew about 19% by the end of the trading day. They've been doing pretty well recently, right? Shopee as a whole.
I think it's largely Shopee, right? Yeah. Largely Shopee, as well as Shopee's digital financial services, Monee. So I think it surprised the analyst and investor community a bit. And of course, I mean, the e-commerce is no secret. I mean, people have been tracking it. But still, yeah, it's a good set of results.
So I think we have an article on the Lowdown blog that will be linked down in the show notes below. If you guys want to check it out, we go a little more in depth into 15 of our thoughts of C Group's latest results. But I think one thing that we pointed out in the article was that Monee has had really good growth in the past few quarters. In 3 of their markets, so in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand, they actually have a loan book of more than $1 billion, right? And they've kept their NPL ratio pretty low.
This is actually interesting because, I mean, you know what loan principal outstanding means, right? It's like how much money that has been loaned out. So Shopee announced how much money is outside. And of course, most of these loans are short term, like 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. So in Shopee's case, if you look at a loan book of $6.9 billion, if you analyze that, the disbursement is probably 3 times of it. Because the money gets loaned out and people pay back,
and then they
disperse again. So the money keeps growing.
Okay.
So Shopee's GMV is probably about 100 billion across all the markets. So when you have $6.9 billion of loan outstanding, times that by 3 or 4, so you have like $25 billion of disbursements over the course of a year. That's already like more than a quarter of Shopee's GMV.
Yeah, that's almost 30% of their GMV.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, do 30% of the Shopee purchases get paid by a buy now pay later?
This Shopee Pay Later is actually useful because they also have vouchers to incentivize you to use Shopee Pay Later. But of course, if I buy my shampoo, it's like $20. I don't need to split that across 3 months of payment. That's a bit ridiculous. But so I'm assuming that's their on-book loans, right?
They have on book.
That's
and
where
off-book.
Shopee Pay Later would come in too.
Interesting. I'm just looking at that. On book is 5.9 billion. That's quite high. So which means that they are not taking much leverage in a way. But anyway, so with such a large loan book, they still managed to keep the
NPL ratio very low. It's 1%.
1%. It's actually kept lowering.
Yeah.
So from 1.3% to 1.2%, then to 1.1%, and now to 1%. There are some investors who are saying that, we're a bit worried, right? Because when you grow the loan book, and sometimes you don't control the risk as much as, I mean, we have seen that in many lending companies. If you want growth, you sacrifice the credit control capabilities. But I think in this case, they have been pretty good in managing both.
Sustainable growth.
Well, if the numbers are real, which I think they are, and it's pretty sustainable.
So of course, Monee isn't the only sort of arm of C Group that's doing well, right? Of course, like we said, Shopee is kind of the bulk of their GMV as well as net income. So Shopee is their e-commerce arm, and the take rate for Shopee has actually been increasing.
So yeah, you grew from 12.3% to 12.6% in Q2. I think the way take rate is calculated is the revenue divided by GMV, right? So how much of the total transaction volume on your platform is captured as your revenue. And even with that, I think Shopee continues to raise the take rate. I mean, some people will say that it's because the competition is not that fierce anymore. And I'm more inclined to believe the narrative that TikTok Shop has sort of a different tactic compared to 2 years ago, because they have the consumer traffic. I mean,
yes.
There's so many people using TikTok. So they're probably taking a more sort of patient and ROI-driven approach, which we have mentioned in our report.
Yes, so we have an e-commerce in Southeast Asia report that will be linked in the show notes if you guys are curious, where we go a little bit more in depth into key players in this region and their strategies. So while we're talking about Shopee, I think another thing that has kind of been mentioned quite a bit is SPX, right? So SPX is Shopee's in-house logistic arm, which they recently renamed from Shopee Express to
SPX Express.
Because I think they're trying to sort of diversify outside of Shopee as well. And Jangkan, you actually recently did an interview with Olivia from Bloomberg about SPX.
Yeah, I think Bloomberg recently wrote an article about SPX, and I like the way they dive into this, right? They look at, okay, the story is that I think SPX mobilized an army of like aunties.
Yes, so the article will be linked down below if you guys want to check it out. But basically, she talks about how SPX really leverages the community in Southeast Asia. Most of us live so closely to one another. And what they've realized is that people help their neighbors collect parcels. And so they just leverage this network to sort of, I guess, help these people earn like a side income as well.
Yeah, I mean, you have been to like e-commerce sorting centers, right?
Yes.
I mean, lots of parcels being sort of collected and
Bunch of parcels.
and sorted. But when we go to the last mile, I mean, this is where it gets fascinating, right? I mean, in different countries, the sort of communities are structured in different ways. And I mean, how do you deliver the parcels to people or to their neighbors or to the shop at the intersection of the road? Or,
some small mom and pop shop
yeah.
in the community.
And you really see a diversity, right? I mean, in Singapore now, just downstairs our building, you see a parcel locker.
Okay. That's interesting because so last year when the Q3 results were out, right, we actually did an episode where we talked about SPX in more detail. It'll be linked in the show notes below if you guys want like a more in-depth dive. And so we were talking about the lockers. And back then there were only 2 lockers in the whole of Singapore, one of which is the one down below our office. But now I feel there are lockers everywhere.
It's actually interesting to manage to penetrate through the condominiums in Singapore.
It's a good location.
I mean,
it really makes sense.
It is good. I mean, Singapore is interesting that many of the condominiums, the committee has lots of power, and usually they don't like random stuff being sort of inserted into the common space. and the fact that the SPX Express parcel lockers are now expanding means that there's enough sort of acceptance of Shopee as a delivery means. If you look at this page, this is the market share of e-commerce logistics players that we have published in our e-commerce in Southeast Asia 3.0 report in June. And you can see that SPX Express and J&T Express, so both of them added together is
about 50, more than 50%.
More than 50% of the market share. And obviously we heard from reliable sources that in Q3 last year, there was a brief moment that SPX Express's parcel volume will actually becoming the number 1.
Oh, so they overtook.
Briefly, and of course, nowadays, I mean, so if you look at J&T Express's numbers, which they also announced, for the first half of this year, they delivered 3.2 billion parcels in Southeast Asia compared to 2 billion the same time last year. So that's like 58% in growth. And we know that most of this growth is driven by TikTok Shop.
Yes, because TikTok Shop has also been growing quite fast in this region. And in most Southeast Asian markets, TikTok Shop actually grew by about 90 to 150%.
So it's essentially almost doubled, right?
Yes. So I think the fastest growing was Malaysia. I mean, no surprise, they were the second fastest growing e-commerce market in general in the region this year.
TikTok has been growing. We have been speaking with people on the ground in multiple countries, and less so in Malaysia, but in countries like Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia, on the ground, people are saying that TikTok Shop has been growing quite aggressively, and some people believe that in terms of parcel volume, and in multiple countries, it might have already overtaken Shopee. So you can see that with the proxy of J&T Express, right? But of course, people use TikTok Shop usually to buy cheap stuff, and because of Shopee Pay Later and their own logistics, etc. So Shopee is more trusted to buy more expensive stuff.
But surprisingly, even though TikTok Shop has been growing quite a bit in Southeast Asia, no one actually asked about them during the earnings call, which is the first, right? Because I remember the previous few earnings calls, there were always questions about like, oh, your competitor, not specified. But
so I listened through the whole earnings call, and of course there's lots of analysts asking questions, and nobody asked about competitive dynamics in Southeast Asia. So we also did a talk with one of the banks, with like institutional investors. It seems that some of the investors were very concerned about competition in Southeast Asia, but most of the investors were not concerned. I don't know why. I think I think the numbers are good. So and also I do think that there's a lot of interest to see what's happening in Brazil, right? Because now so much interest in Brazil.
That's true, because
so much
most of
competition.
the analysts that were asking talked about Brazil.
I counted like, I don't know, four questions.
4 questions specifically about Brazil.
Specifically about Brazil from different analysts.
I mean, Brazil is a market that Shopee is in as well, right? And we've actually also talked about Brazil quite a bit the past few episodes. We did an episode where we say that a lot of Chinese companies are going into Brazil. And of course, this includes Chinese e-commerce companies, right? So Temu is in Brazil now. Shein is in Brazil. I think TikTok Shop recently launched in Brazil.
In May.
Yeah.
So it has been there for
less than 3 months.
less than 3 months.
Almost 3 months, actually.
Less than a quarter.
Yeah.
Actually, Shopee's management was asked about TikTok Shop in Brazil during the earnings call, and I think their response is that we're quite familiar with their business. So they're still young, they're still very small, but we're watching them. So we know that Temu is growing quite aggressively in Brazil. Quite aggressively.
I think Temu has been sort of trying to diversify their attention away from the US, right? With all the geopolitical tension. So they've kind of been investing quite a bit in other markets as well.
I think that company is interesting, right? Because I've spoken with quite a number of people who know the inner workings of this company. All of them are telling me that this company never sets a target.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Like they never set a target to hit, or?
No, they never set a target because the target is meaningless. So what they do is that, I mean, they put the different countries, they put different teams and get them to compete against each other. Then you see sort of the real potential being unleashed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But that makes sense, because technically if you set a target, people would do whatever nonsense to hit the target. And then once they hit the target, they just get comfortable. That's so stressful. Oh my gosh.
It is very stressful. This is a fascinating company.
Oh, we should do an episode about that.
Yeah.
If you guys have questions about Temu or Ping Tuo's culture, since they are the parent company, right, you can leave comments down below and we'll do an episode about it.
So we talk about TikTok Shop, we talk about Temu and Shein is in Brazil. And
there's also Mercado Libre, so that's...
which is the incumbent.
Yeah.
And of course, they are defending their
home
turf.
ground.
Yeah. So they expanded their free shipping program, which means that they sacrifice a bit of the margins to protect the market share and encourage growth. They have also been recruiting quite aggressively in China. So they've built a team for sourcing, for ads and stuff. Because at the end of the day, you look at all these players, they pretty much all realize that to power the e-commerce growth, they need a supply chain from China.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, most of these companies already have an advantage because they are tapping into the supply chain from China.
Yeah. So Shopee claims to be number one by order volume in Brazil, and they have their own logistics and stuff. So I do think that this market will still offer them a lot of growth, and with all these players coming together, and collectively they will expand the market quite a bit.
I think that's true for Brazil and Southeast Asia, right? In that these markets both they have room for e-commerce penetration to grow. I think there's still room for multiple competitors to come in.
Southeast Asia, I'm not so sure, but we can talk about this. So I've been to Brazil a few times, and we can talk about this country in more detail. But the spending power and the willingness to spend in Brazil still far exceed most countries in Southeast Asia. So it's a country which is established and industrialized much earlier compared to many countries here.
We should do an episode on Brazil e-commerce specifically. If you guys have questions, you can leave them down below, and we will answer them in our next episode. Or next few episodes
about Brazil,
about e-commerce in Brazil, because I think a lot of things are happening in Brazil, right? And of course, we're on the topic of e-commerce, but Keeta, who is the international arm of Meituan, is also entering Brazil. And with what all Meituan is doing with quick commerce in China, there's also a possibility that Keeta could enter quick commerce in Brazil.
Yeah, it is. So
which add them into this competition as well.
There's lots of talk about, that Meituan is fighting a very expensive subsidy war with Alibaba in China on quick commerce and food delivery.
We also did a podcast about that, linked in the show notes down below.
But there's lots of talk about whether the war in China would sort of divert resources that Meituan could possibly invest in international markets. And in terms of people and some resources, definitely we see that, some people which were previously meant to be sent to international markets, now they have to stay in China to defend their turf. But I don't think that changed the determination for them to go out, because so one school of thought, which I agree, is that look at how constantly competitive and fierce the competition is in China, and that makes each platform will think that, what a nice sort of breather to go to international markets where the competition is not that
less
fierce.
Intense.
But maybe, if all of them think the same way, look at what's happening in Brazil.
That's true. And usually they have the same few countries that they want to go into? Because obviously the country has potential.
The country has potential, and also, I mean, and also these guys are competitive, right? So, so they don't want others to capture that market, and also if they go in together, they leverage the same base of service providers, same base of payment providers, same base of sort of supply chain, etc. So that actually help them collectively expand the market. Eventually, who will win is hard to say, but of course, I mean, for the market, it's supposedly a good thing.
Because it grows. It's a very good thing for consumers. Competition is always good for consumers because then you get free shipping, you get vouchers, you get free bubble tea,
and you get a variety of different goods which were previously not available to you in your neighborhood store.
That's true. You get the variety of the quantity of goods that you can get.
The selection, yeah. So another thing about Brazil is that this is also a country with a large credit market, and we know that Nubank and Mercado Libre have both built very successful sort of consumer credit businesses. And you can look at Nubank's share price. I think the company is doing quite well. So it is a fascinating play. But I think Shopee has its like user base and stuff. So there's still a lot of room for growth for the consumer credit business in Brazil. Will they overtake Nubank? I think Nubank has a very, very good head start. So it's a bit hard. But in terms of growth potential, there should be a lot of growth potential. So we mentioned about the 3 countries which have had a loan book of 1 billion, right? We actually said we're a bit curious why the Philippines has not become one, because we know that the country has a very robust consumer credit needs there, and GCash, the local player, has been doing a pretty good job in lending business. And so it'll be interesting to see that, okay, which one will become the 4th? Would it be the Philippines or
would it be
Brazil?
And I think also for Shopee, the advantage they have is that obviously for them, it's an ecosystem. So they can leverage their e-commerce platform to sort of drive their financial services.
Yes, and also for them to get a rich sort of understanding about their consumers, right? I mean,
through the amount of data they have.
It's a playbook that has been proven by Alibaba in China. Look at how successful Ant became. But of course, I mean, took too much leverage that led to some regulatory concerns. But you can learn from the positive lessons as well as the pitfalls and actually grow that credit business in Southeast Asia as well as in Brazil.
So I think we can see from the Q2 results that the arms of C Group, Shopee, Monee has been all doing quite well, right?
They've all engines fired up, right?
Yeah, they are really like accelerating. And of course, it's interesting to see because competition in this space is still evolving. We know that although TikTok Shop is kind of focusing on more sustainable growth, they do still want to grow, right? So it'll be interesting to see how sort of brands or even all the enablers, logistic providers,
Sellers.
especially in a region where platform logistics are kind of always taking the lead, how other third-party logistic players would kind of evolve to see. So if you guys have any thoughts, you can leave them in the comment down below. And that's all for this week's episode of the Impulso podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. And if you did, do like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay up to date on the latest happenings and trends in tech, new retail, and the broader digital economy.
Okay.
Thank you and
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.